Good afternoon and welcome everyone. I'm Cristina Chalaco. I am the CEO of Coalition for Conservation. We are an environmental charity based in Australia, and our mission is to bridge policymaking with expertise on climate and energy. This year we brought a delegation of parliamentarians from Australia to COP28 here in Dubai. This is our third COP, and we lined up a very good expert panel today to discuss the possibilities of nuclear power for Australia, because currently we have a ban on developing a nuclear energy. Now, in this panel, we will hear from different experts. Because we only have 45 exciting minutes, we decided to skip the bios, skip the introductions. They're all here, and most of you know them anyway. And I would like to say that we're very happy to have here Ted O'Brien with us. He came to this delegation for the first time attending COP. Ted is our Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy back in Australia. He's responsible for formulating the future policies for Australia in energy and climate. And Ted has initiated a very important conversation on the possibility of nuclear for Australia. We have partnered with the World Nuclear Association to do this event with Sama Bilbao, who we have been friends for a couple of years now. And Sama will be part of this conversation as well and explain the wonderful work that they do to promote nuclear and create better supply chains in the industry. So without further ado, I would like to invite Ted. He will first have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation. He will lay down the scene of Australia and nuclear. And then we will sit down with our panelists and have an interactive conversation. Hopefully there will be time for Q&A at the end. I would like to welcome everyone, including all the parliamentarians who are here from Australia and all of you who are involved in the nuclear industry. Thank you.
Christina, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking your time out today. It truly is with hope and optimism, and also with a very keen eye to the future, that I'm delighted to be here in Dubai attending this COP28. And I want to thank the World Nuclear Association for the kind invitation to address COP, and also Coalition for Conservation for kindly hosting this event. When it comes to COP, you have delegates from around about 200 different countries. And so it wouldn't be hard to find the differences between us. But what unites us is the fact that we all share the same planet, and all of us has a vested interest in protecting it. What's more, we all share humanity, and it's natural, it's inherent as human beings, no matter your culture, your ethnicity, your history, your political persuasion, to have a desire to want the very best for those who you love most. And so for me, and also for my wife Sophia, that's these three kids. That's Alexandra, who's 11, it's Henry, who's 5, and little Edwina, who is barely 2 months old. Now, much of the debate on climate change and energy anchors to the goal of net zero by 2050. And when I think of that goal, the first thing that comes to mind for me actually isn't about emissions reduction per se. It's about my own children and their peers. And it's asking the question, what sort of world do I want them to live in come 2050? And as an Australian, I ask, what sort of Australia do I want my children to live in by 2050, mid-century? Now, I want them to live in a world that's peaceful, that's prosperous, and a world that's sustainable. And I want them to live in an Australia in 2050 that is rich, strong, and fiercely independent I want them to have a future of ample freedom of opportunity and a way of life that is safe, that is healthy, and that is happy. Now, all of this is probably very nice, and you may say, well, what's that got to do with climate change and energy? And my answer is absolutely everything, everything. Because whether this hope-filled vision is realised or not depends in large part on the pathway we choose to pursue as we try to go towards net zero by 2050. You see, right now, we are amidst a fork in the road. We choose the right path and our hopes for the future can be realised. But we choose the wrong path and the consequences could be dire. Sadly, right now I believe Australia is venturing down the wrong path, evidenced by our failure to tackle the climate and energy trilemma of affordability, security and sustainability. On affordability, power prices are skyrocketing and Australians are now paying some of the highest prices in the world. On security, reliability is under grave threat as 80% of Australia's baseload power will be exiting the grid by 2035. Interventions in our gas market is eroding confidence and supply, and investment in renewables have stalled. On sustainability, Australia's emissions are no longer coming down, sadly, but starting to go up. Only slightly, but still they're moving in the wrong direction. Now, these outcomes are a direct consequence of Australia having taken the wrong turn in that fork in the road and following that wrong path. But here's what fills me with hope and with optimism. An alternative path does exist. And it's a path that relies on an all-of-the-above approach, a path that humbly recognises that getting to net zero is really hard, and we can't afford to take any option off the table. This isn't to imply, by the way, that every technology wins a prize, but rather we must provide for optionality if we're to get this right. And all eggs in the basket, renewables-only approach that the current government is now taking is too narrow. And if you look at the economics and the engineering, it will simply fail. Now, Australia's track record on renewables is something to be enormously proud of. Renewables will play a really important role in Australia's future energy mix. But the thing is, they can't do it on their own. We need more storage and a technology-agnostic approach to getting it. We shouldn't be tearing down our baseload power stations prematurely. We need more gas and we should embrace technologies that will abate such fuels, including carbon capture and storage. And Australia should consider establishing a civil nuclear program and introduce zero emissions nuclear energy. 33 economies right now use nuclear energy as of today, and up to another 50 are considering introducing nuclear for the first time or looking to do so. Meanwhile, in Australia, we have a ban. A civil nuclear program is not allowed. Bizarrely, as a free market liberal economy, we have a moratorium in place that deems it illegal. Nevertheless, Australia already is a nuclear nation. We know that nuclear saves lives because we've been operating a nuclear reactor for well over 60 years, which provides medical isotopes helping diagnose and treat cancers and other debilitating conditions. We know that nuclear has the capacity to save lives, but also to protect lives, evidenced by our adoption of nuclear-propelled submarines in partnership with the United States and the United Kingdom under the AUKUS agreement. And we know that nuclear can also underpin livelihoods. We're the third largest supplier of uranium in the world, so we see it ourselves, the jobs that it creates for our own people. But Australia's uranium helps power nuclear plants the world over, and we know that the benefit it provides to the residents and workers, business and communities in those countries underpin their livelihoods. We also appreciate that nuclear energy helps other nations tackle that climate and energy trilemma. On affordability, nuclear energy keeps power prices low by reducing total system costs. Now, this has been proven by our allies and partners around the world time and time over, and analyses by international organisations, and a recent one also done in Australia, says it's going to be the exact same thing in the context of Australia. On security, nuclear energy provides baseload power, but as we know, especially the new designs and the next designs have the capacity to ramp up and ramp down to work together with renewables. And on sustainability, nuclear energy is not only zero emissions, but it has a fuel density which is second to none, giving it a very small geographical footprint which is far kinder to the local environment than other comparable energy solutions. And while I'm on the topic of energy security, fuel density, I should say, this explains why waste from nuclear plants is so minuscule. Nuclear energy is also one of the safest forms of energy generation in the world. And nuclear energy is one of the fastest ways to decarbonise an electricity grid, with 5 of the top 10 fastest decarbonisations in history due to its use. And on that point, I want to pay tribute to the UAE, given it has brought a 1.4 gigawatt nuclear reactor online in each of the last 4 years, on time and on budget. Nuclear is not a silver bullet solution, but if we are to reach net zero, it has to be part of our future energy mix. No nuclear, no net zero. I stand with the US climate change envoy John Kerry, who said here at COP only a few days ago, you can't get to net zero in 2050 without some nuclear. And also French President Macron, who in relation to Australia's moratorium said, I hope you'll manage to lift the ban. COP28 will be known as the nuclear COP, and I pay tribute to those nations, including some of our closest allies and friends, who came together here only a few days ago and pledged their support to zero emissions nuclear energy while calling for a tripling of nuclear energy capacity by 2050. And today I'm happy to announce that a re-elected coalition government will, at its first COP after being returned to office, sign the nuclear pledge and return Australia to where it belongs, standing alongside its friends and allies. You see, when you think of our friends and allies, we need them and they need us. If we were to establish our own civil nuclear program, we need the demonstrable expertise and experience that our friends offer. And likewise, they need our help too. For all the talk about Australia one day becoming a clean energy superpower, the truth is we already are. Australia has the world's largest reserves of uranium, and we should use it. The nuclear pledge coming out of this COP to triple the world's nuclear capacity should come as a wake-up call for Australia that we have a role to play in helping our allies and partners shore up their own energy security as they decarbonise while keeping their lights on and their prices down. Energy security is national security. Energy security is important to every single nation, especially those which are geographically constrained for choice. And this represents not just an enormous commercial opportunity for Australia, but also a moral obligation that we step up and deliver for the planet. Even if our current government remains blind to the need for zero-emissions nuclear energy, they can't deny that the vast majority of the rest of the world sees things differently. And they need what we have, uranium. It's time we took back energy security for the West. And we should do so ambitiously, for we have the capacity as a nation to do more than just supply uranium, but to develop capabilities in other areas of the nuclear fuel cycle so we become far more indispensable as part of the global nuclear energy supply chain. Much is often said about the moratorium against nuclear energy in Australia, but it is a lesser-known fact that the exploration and mining of uranium is also banned in many of our jurisdictions. And so, not only must we consider removing the nuclear ban, but I would also encourage a rethink of the moratoriums that exist, banning the exploration and mining of uranium. Let me now bring my remarks to a close before we go to our panel. And in doing so, say again what a great pleasure it is to be here with my Liberal and National colleagues from the Australian Parliament. And I thank again the World Nuclear Association and also Coalition for Conservation. And it is indeed with optimism and hope that I look forward to Australia working with our friends and allies to ensure we do create a better world for future generations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ted, for a comprehensive scene of what happens in Australia at the moment. I'd love to invite now our panelists to come and sit down and so we can have further discussions. Thank you, Ted. Since you've spent about a quarter of the time, of our time, I'm going to pass it on straight to the Honourable Jeff Merrifield, who's had decades of experience in the nuclear energy sector. Based on what Ted has spoken about just now, if Australia were to lift the ban and ever develop an industry, where do you think the opportunities are between Australia and the US specifically, given your experience, and in terms of building the workforce that we will require?
Well, before I answer that question directly, let me just say I've been doing this for decades, and I have to say, Ted, that was one of the most full-throated and clearest presentations about why nuclear makes sense. So I give you great kudos in that regard. I also know, in terms of repealing bans, we've had that in the United States. We've had several states, a handful of states within the last year. West Virginia is an example of one. Illinois today, which had a ban on new nuclear power, those have been repealed. So that really is an opportunity. I think it's, to your point, a very good thing for Australia. But the combinations. One thing you didn't mention in any great degree is the AUKUS treaty between Australia, the UK, and the US, which will provide for the supply of 8 attack submarines that will be powered by clean, safe nuclear power. There is going to be a need for an infrastructure in Australia to support those, not just at the military level, but in the civilian arena. So there's opportunities to the question, universities to exchange, between the 3 countries. Supply of parts, components, the people that are needed to build those submarines are going to need to get the training and get the opportunities. And there will be significant economic opportunities for Australian companies to supply parts and pieces, and they could well also be involved in the same activity. I'm the vice chair of the U.S. Nuclear Industry Council. We are very much looking forward to, and I'm sure our UK counterparts as well, in engaging with Australia to help enable the building of a civilian infrastructure that will supply the people, we'll supply the training, and we'll supply the companies that can provide those components. Final point, and I'll end, is exports. As we see in the United States, the nuclear industry creates a significant number of jobs, not just in the local area and re-employing people who used to work in shut down coal plants, but also the overall production in world marketplace is enormous. And those are the kind of things that I think Australia will really be able to tap into. And I could see, within a relatively short period of time, a very robust opportunity for Australia to be part of that international nuclear commerce and make a real difference in jobs and make a real difference in exports.
Thank you, Jeff. David, you've been involved since day one with the development of the nuclear industry here in the UAE. So we'd love to hear your perspective on that trajectory and what lessons other new entrants can learn from the experience in the UAE.
Thank you very much. And of course, thank you very much also for the complimentary words about the UAE program. And I think everybody involved in the program is quite proud of what's been achieved. But I want to put it in context. When the program started, when we first began exploring this topic in 2008, there was exactly one Emirati nuclear engineer in the world who I hired immediately upon his graduation from Purdue in the United States and came into the program that helped incubate and start the strategy. And today we have hundreds of nuclear engineers and a full reactor engineering capability within our nuclear utility, which is quite unique. And the most recently commissioned reactors, Unit 2 and Unit 3, have been achieving close to 99% availability factors in their first year of operation. And I say all of that not to gloat, but to make a point. We started with very little infrastructure, very little human capability, and were able, by making a serious decision and dedicating the resources, to achieve what I think is a very successful outcome. I also, in the course of that time, had the opportunity to be part of the negotiation of the bilateral nuclear cooperation agreement between Australia and the UAE, which has been the basis on which the UAE has been able to procure uranium from Australia. And I have to say, even then, when visiting Canberra, the thought did strike me, this is a country that could employ nuclear energy much more easily than the UAE could. So I think the one point I would say is, if you look at where we started and where we got to in a relatively short period of time, what Australia could achieve if it made the decision and dedicated its much larger resources and capabilities would be, I think, something even more impressive. And so I very much hope that it is something that the people of Australia will think of, because like you, I also worry about my children. And we recognize that climate change won't be solved in Australia or in the United States. It will be solved everywhere at the same time. And so we all hope that everybody makes reasonable decisions to get to a good outcome for all of us.
Can I just add one thing? And the other thing, and it's amazing what they've done here in the UAE, an advantage that Australia has in the same regard, you have an established regulator. Now, they have to add additional capabilities for nuclear power, but obviously they have a very good reactor in Opal. I've been there, it's excellent. So you've already got some of those building blocks you need.
Thank you, David. We'll hear now from Stefano. We heard from two Americans. We're going to hear from an Italian now. Stefano is more on the technical side of things. There's so many types of SMRs, and you can talk a little bit about nucleo, but give us some perspective as well on why Italy is now reconsidering nuclear.
Well, I think that Italy is reconsidering nuclear because every country should reconsider. I'm very glad to see that now the candidates to have a new nuclear are 50, because just a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, there were about 33, if I remember well, 32. So I'm very happy that this number is increasing. I think nuclear energy is a perfect form of energy to be manufactured because it's so intense, so concentrated. So it's really a sustainable way to produce. And my advice to Australia would be to look at the new technologies. We are developing a new technology as a company in Europe. But the new technologies give many opportunities to nuclear. They leverage on 80 years of experience of operating nuclear facilities. The small reactor may adapt better to your grid needs, I believe, but also to industrial application. These are reactors that are conceived to be cheaper. It's not always the case, as we see from the news. But especially the advanced reactors have this opportunity because the so-called Generation 4 was born to make safer and cheaper reactors at the same time. And I think some of the technology may deliver very well on that. And as soon as become safer and cheaper, you can find even more use than electricity production. You can really contribute to production of hydrogen that goes into then the production of sustainable fuels. You can use it for transportation, also in shipping and so on. As a small modular reactors developer, I'm seeing a lot of application. France is an example, has launched a program that is seeking all of the industrial application, cogeneration of nuclear energy. So this is my advice for your country. By the way, I have a kid also in Australia, so I'm concerned as you, she's still studying, I'm concerned as you as the future of nuclear in Australia. I'm very happy that if one day Australia will come back strongly into nuclear.
Thanks, Stefano. Sama, you need no introduction here in this room. We've been working in this industry for a very, very long time. Based in London, but you have this incredible exposure talking to so many different countries and new entrants and the ones that have been there. What have you seen change recently, and where are the big opportunities for the nuclear industry?
Well, thank you, Christina. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to all of you and to discuss the opportunities that exist in Australia. So I would say, many people are talking of COP28 as the nuclear COP, and I really want to rephrase that a little bit, because what I think is changed is not so much that the nuclear industry will become very good at advertising. That's not what's changed. What's changed is that many countries have actually gotten their pocket calculator and they have started to do the math, and they have realized that it's simply not possible to be serious about reaching climate change goals in a way that is cost-effective and, very importantly, equitable. That means leaving nobody behind. It's just not possible to do that without having nuclear in the equation. This doesn't mean that every country in the world will have nuclear energy. Maybe many will or will not, but certainly this is a math that needs to be made, and this is what we are seeing. So many of the countries that had this declaration supporting nuclear and putting an actual ambitious goal of tripling global nuclear capacity, they have done their math. And I think that definitely is a perfect opportunity for Australia to, at the very least, do the math. And frankly, we just heard that Australia, perhaps more than many other countries, have unique opportunities and unique synergies. The fact that you already have experience utilizing this technology for decades, the fact that you already, that you do have enormous resources of this fuel, and then there is these geopolitical connections that would actually facilitate the launch of this technology in Australia, certainly makes something that, in my opinion, should at the very least be evaluated. So that would be my advice to Australia.
Thank you, Sama. I've attended the event where Macron and 20 other countries, and you were there, signed a pledge to triple nuclear energy by 2050. And I found out the other night that it wasn't a random figure, or it wasn't anything that the industry decided to do to protect their own industry. It was something that was put forward by the International Energy Agency based on lots of studies that we will need to triple nuclear energy by 2050. So in that sense, to all participants here, how would new countries like Australia, benefit that figure in terms of not just increasing nuclear power, but also in the supply chain and all the different bits of the puzzle that we need, skills and everything else?
Well, one thing I'd start with is, it isn't like where we were 20 years ago when you thought about just nuclear power. Really what we're talking about is using nuclear as an empowerment for decarbonization. That's both electricity as well as heat. And so there are you'd really want to take a look at a variety of the different industries in Australia that could use that very high temperature heat from some of these advanced reactors to basically, get some of the carbon out of the system. Another one, and Canada and the United States are looking at this very closely, is using small microreactors in more remote locations for mining operations. Obviously, mining is very important in Australia. That may be an opportunity to use those uses. And finally, obviously, there's a number of very large desalination facilities in Australia. Many of those do use renewables. But as that is going to be increasingly important for Australia to provide clean water, nuclear could be well suited for the systems used to provide that water.
I'd like to add something to that too, because I think, and Stefano mentioned this, that some of the new advanced reactors are unique. One, the small modular reactors have a different format and a different size, and they have some advantages in terms of higher thermal efficiency, and I think they could potentially explore a new cost basis for nuclear energy when they get to their nth of a kind economics. But the other interesting thing about expansion using advanced technologies is that there are no incumbents that control the fabrication of those reactors today. So with the legacy large format light water reactors that exist today, there are a few large players, Doosan Heavy Industries, Japan Steel Works, others that when it comes to large components, the infrastructure is so massive and already so established with a number of players that there's not many entry points. But if Australia is thinking about adopting a civil nuclear energy program and looks at the small modular reactor, advanced reactors in particular space, there will be opportunities for new industry leaders to be able to get a part of that fabrication market because it isn't already captured by a certain party. So I think there's this interesting opportunity for other countries to look at new nuclear technologies and then look at their capability to become part of that supply chain and establish for themselves what will be the future equivalent of the Doosan Heavy Industries or the Japan Steel Works of the world.
And in terms of getting bipartisanship, I mean, you've had experiences in the US, and we know that if there's two things that the Americans can agree on is China and nuclear. And so how do we move the public sentiment? And I know, Stefano, with the new technologies, the safety procedures and the safeguard, the mechanism is different. It's a lot safer. But how do we reassure people that nuclear is safe, that it is green and safe?
Well, I would say that you don't need to partner with a country to develop nuclear. You need there is a change, a shift in the paradigm today because the private sector is entering more and more into nuclear, private capitals. So there is a proliferation of startups, of companies that are privately funded. When I started a company only 2 years ago, they were about 30, but only in the past year there were 17 companies that were born only in France. Can you believe it? To address this market is a market that will explode. So I would say that the private sector can contribute to that. And if you address directly into the small modular reactor world, Australia will interact much more with a private sector than potentially with countries, because there is this shift. It's slow, but it's happening like a little bit like in the space, where at the beginning the economy was only the projects were only governmental, and then the industry developed very much. So this is also another opportunity.
So I would say that we have seen an incredible change in the perception that the average person has of energy in general and nuclear energy in particular. I mean, I think that in the last perhaps couple of years, for sure, energy has become very personal to many people. It used to be that they would ask you, what do you think about this or that form on energy? And it's very easy to have an opinion when it doesn't cost you anything. But in the last couple of years, when some of us come home and we open the mailbox and we look at our energy bill and we say, oh my gosh, suddenly these are decisions that are much more personal. or when we have people in countries in Europe, not in Africa, in Europe, that are considering whether they can eat today or turn on the heating today, those are very personal decisions. So I think that definitely this is an opportunity to talk to Australians, many of whom perhaps are having these difficulties. I mean, you mentioned some of the cost of energy in Australia. So that's number one. And number two, we have also seen an enormous shift on the way the younger generation looks at energy in general and nuclear energy in particular. So I think that the new environmental youth, it is much more pragmatic, it is much more science-based, and they are actually doing their homework, trying to understand what are the facts, what are the myths. So I think that, I mean, and clearly in Australia, you do have fabulous young influencers such as William Shatner and others. So I think that you have a good opportunity to take this wave of new information and maybe, change some minds.
Yeah, let me just add, and I completely agree with Sama. We've had an incredible number of youth-led organizations or other folks who've really popped up, and that has really changed the dynamic, all of which are centered around the concern about climate. There is an age difference. You have people who are, frankly, over 60 who are more mindful of some things that happened in the past. The youth, they are so concerned about climate change, nuclear to them makes a whole lot of sense. The other thing is, I think we've seen a real difference in polling. You know, about 55% of the American people are in support of nuclear power, but if you ask people, what do you think the percentage is, people say 35%. So I think, there may be more people in Australia that are going to be supportive of nuclear than you might imagine.
Very interesting. I'll just ask Sama, who's in touch with so many new nations entering the nuclear world. Do you ever hear them say, or when you approach them to sort of discuss nuclear, do you ever hear them say, we're not going to consider it because of the time frame?
No, I think that actually we are seeing that it doesn't, I mean, so again, this is another one of the stereotypes. I mean, we've seen the very fabulous example of the UAE that has gone from 0 to 25 almost, I mean, it will be in a few months, 25% of their electricity coming from zero carbon nuclear energy, and this has been a total of perhaps 14 years. You will correct me if I'm wrong, but we are seeing this in many other countries. I mean, I was earlier in the year in Bangladesh. Bangladesh became a nuclear nation sometime in September. They got their first fuel delivery, and Bangladesh is going to go from 0 to 10% of their electricity in less than 10 years. That is so. It is certainly. It's not. I'm not saying this just magically happened. Clearly, these countries. You need to have a plan. You need to have a vision. You need to get organized. Obviously, many countries have been working together with the International Atomic Energy Agency to develop infrastructure, or with others. That is certainly. Many countries are telling me, we are ready. We want this energy. We want it now.
Ted, I wonder if you have any comments based on what you heard in terms of what could be applied to Australia.
Chris, I think the main lesson for me, and the UAE is it's the 10th country I've been to and sat down face to face with people in the energy market to understand what they do and understand nuclear. So we've been doing our due diligence. I think that Australia certainly has what it takes. I have absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. I've been pleasantly surprised, actually, about how closely knit the nuclear energy community is in terms of the willingness to engage, to share. And I think that would put us in good stead. In Australia, we are looking at not the old technology, but the new technology. So we're particularly interested in generation 3+ and beyond, microreactors, small reactors, large reactors, on-grid, off-grid, understanding the importance of the electricity generation as well as the heat and what that can do to industry. We also have a very keen eye, as Australians are enormous traders, that there is an opportunity here not just given our partnerships and relationships, but also our place, our geographical place in the world, in Southeast Asia, that we do offer as a nation something beyond just our resources and the potential to be a customer, but rather a real potential to be a partner. And if we are dead set serious, as we must be, about getting to net zero, we've got to have the hard conversations. And, you know, one of your questions, Chris, went to, you know, carrying the public. And the good thing is I think the Australian people are absolutely up for the conversation, because so long as we're open and transparent, which we have been, then we need to have this conversation, because after the due diligence I've done, that's where we have reached this conclusion that we cannot get there. We cannot decarbonise our electricity grid and hit net zero without nuclear. And I'm just delighted, and we're seeing it through the panel, the sort of assistance and friendships we have around the world. If we should choose to go down that path, we certainly would not be on our own.
Thank you, Ted. We've only got a few minutes left. So what I'd like to do is ask each of the panelists, what sort of advice would you give to Australia in terms of once we lift the ban, how to start, how to go about, maybe what to avoid and not to avoid? What would be your advice? Jeff, you can start.
Well, to go back to one of my comments, I do think you're really going to start from the bottom up. It's engaging at universities, at colleges, at training institutes to get them prepared. You need to have the regulator-to-regulator conversations. I think in particular, the U.S. and Canada, or the U.K. and Canada and the U.S. are very eager to engage and be helpful. I think there needs to be, obviously, association communications. The association I represent is very eager to come to Australia and have that conversation about how collaboratively we can help Australia begin to build out and be a real player in the nuclear industry. And we certainly would welcome those very same folks to come to the U.S. as well. So I think, as mentioned, I think there's a lot of opportunities for partnership.
That's great advice. Thanks, David.
So I have two ideas, one tactical and the other. First, on the point of regulation, I've been asked before if you were ever to do this again, try and initiate a program from scratch and carry it forward, what would you do differently? One thing I would say is I would invest in the regulator first and get it moving toward the implementation of the nuclear program in advance. The reason I say that, it's a very low cost to do that. You're really talking tens of millions of dollars to start to develop those capabilities, but it removes so much risk in having regulations available so that when industry comes for implementation, that they actually know where to go and they're not wondering, okay, is this the right approach or is that the right approach? So that's kind of a tactical question that I would say. But it would, we were lucky in that we ended up finding our same way, but you don't want to be lucky. You want that to be by case. The other thing I would say, and one of the reasons why our program moved so swiftly, is before we actually moved forward, we had a very open discussion. We sound like nuclear proponents here, but I'm really against the idea of techno-tribalism, right? We can't be only nuclear. You have to have a discussion about that overall portfolio. And in fact, the nuclear program here was part of a recommendation to move to a diversified portfolio that included renewables and nuclear, and also, some amount of natural gas as a way to get to a zero carbon solution in the future. But that discussion needs to be had with real numbers, with the politics parked on the side, and when everybody can see the numbers and agree on the numbers at the end of the day, it sort of clears the path to move. And that was actually very useful in the program here.
Thank you, David. We've got 1 minute and 40 seconds.
And some numbers that are very important is the overall cost of a country to produce electricity. So I like very much your systemic approach. So I think I would advise to set the goals for Australia, to really plan in advance where these reactors have to be, what they have to do, the percentage, and see the impact on the overall cost of this, because you would then understand the cost of the grid, that you would understand the cost of renewables, because these vary according to the percentage of the renewables they have to serve. So this is a strong advice. And then choose a technology that maybe not produce a lot of waste, because advanced technology can really very much reduce the waste, the nuclear waste. So this is also good advice, I would say.
Thank you, Stefano. Last but not least.
Yes. I think that I was going to maybe elaborate on what you just heard. I mean, I do think that it would be very important to have a very, very serious analysis of how nuclear fits or doesn't fit in the plan, in the long-term energy plan of Australia. So to do the math, as I said, as we just heard, to have a careful analysis. But I think it would be very good if that careful analysis is done in a way that is multilateral, meaning that you engage with all sides of the political spectrum in Australia to do that analysis. So whatever the numbers come up to be, it will be something that is not this side or the other side.
Thank you so much. Just on time. My final word is, as an environmentalist, I can't wait for the ban to be lifted. I believe that we must develop clean energy for Australia and for the world, and that nuclear should be part of that equation. I'd like to thank the panelists and very, very much for your input and your observations, and thank Ted for the great work he's doing in Australia. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We're going to be moving to the next building for a little reception if you want to join us later. Thank you so much for being here.
So I also sit on.
You are a celebrity.
No.